Welcome back to Real Talk. Today we are featuring one of our alumni, the class of 2011. Bart actually grew up in the Netherlands and spent time in Montana, and he'll share a little bit of his story of how he's currently living in London, but also lived in Boston, and also travels the world, and none of his friends are from his home country. All these details to come. We'll be right back with Bart. Welcome back to Real Talk, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our next guest, Bart. Even though, again, we're in Boston, he is coming from London. Though you're not a Brit, where are you actually from again?
I am from the Netherlands.
So you're half Dutch, kind of British, and also very American. So you are the class of 2011. It's been 7 years and spent your year in quite legitimately the middle of nowhere, Montana.
Yeah, in a small town in eastern Montana, yes.
How many people were in the town that you were in?
250 only, so very
Wait,
small.
250 in like the whole town?
The whole town and the surrounding, yeah.
And didn't you play football? Like, how did that work? Was there like...
Yeah, because we're such a small school as well, we had about 80 people in our school. I actually played six-man football, so that's basically how American football is played, but then a smaller version of it on a full field.
Wow, then you must have been like the star. You can't see because Bart's like on a screen right now, but he's pretty tall, so I'm sure in a school of 80 people, they were stoked to have you on the football team.
Yes, for sure. I was the kicker and I was a wide receiver as well, so we had several tasks because it was such a small team.
That's a dream, and I'm sure, let's actually rewind a bit. I think that I always get caught up when people play football and love it, but if we rewind to 2010 or 2009, when you decided to go on exchange, you're sitting in Holland, in the Netherlands at home, and why did you decide, yes, I want to go to the US?
Because my aunt and uncle actually live in the US and I visited them when I was about 8 years old. And I knew someday I wanted to do the exact same thing, moving from the Netherlands to the US. So then as soon as I heard about high school exchange here, being able to live there for 10 and a half months, I knew right away that that is something that I wanted to do. So I went, as soon as I turned 17 years old, I went on exchange.
Amazing. And what did you think when you found out about Montana? I mean, I'm American, and I also find Montana to be a little mysterious. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, so I asked a lot of people that I knew have been to the States before as to whether they have visited the state or what they can tell me about it. I also Googled it right away. And actually, no one really was able to tell me specifics about where I was going, and no one has really been to the place where I was going to be at. So Google was the one that sort of helped me. Tried to search for the towns, tried to search for the area, and really get a sort of a grasp of what it's going to be like. But then I was, at first, to be honest, I was a little bit skeptical. I wasn't sure if that was truly what I wanted to do. High school exchange here in the middle of nowhere. How do people get groceries? It takes about an hour and a half to get to the closest supermarket. So I just didn't really understand that part. But then I realized that it is really a different experience than what I was used to, only walking 10 minutes to the nearest supermarket, as an example. But also, I wanted to experience the American culture. So what better way than staying in a small town in the middle of nowhere? And people live there as well. So it's not like they wouldn't be able to survive. So I was excited actually to and open-minded at some point as well. Yeah, open-minded to a new experience and living with a different family.
And family that's become your family, because you've gone back to visit them, and really recently as well,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, so I have two younger sisters. At home, I have an older sister, so that was a little bit different already, as well as my host parents were a lot younger compared to my own parents at home. And they were 10 years old, the host sisters. They were twins, and they are currently 17 years old. So they are actually the same age as I was when I went on exchange, which is insane to think about. I still see them as about this height, and they are now fully grown and nearly adults. So.
Well, I think what's really cool, so Bart and I have actually spent quite a bit of time talking about our exchange stories. Maybe obsessing is the better word over our exchange stories, because he lived here in Boston with us. I guess it's been a full year since you left, but let's sort of unpack that as well. What brought you from Montana? You go back to the Netherlands, and then sort of what happened next?
So I started my studies. I studied in Amsterdam, where I studied international business. So something very international because I sort of loved the fact that I was abroad and I wanted to go abroad again and I wanted to learn more about the world. So I studied for 4 years in Amsterdam, and after my studies, I also worked in Amsterdam for EF. After which I heard about a new opportunity, a new role that was in Boston, where I worked in Boston as well for a year. After that, I went straight to London. So it's quite been quite a journey after my exchange. Yes, that's yeah. Now here in London, it's like you said, it has been a year. So a year in Amsterdam, a year in the US in Boston, and now a year here in London. It's crazy to think about, honestly. I can never imagine something like this, to be fair.
Yeah, of course, and I think that's the thing is in 2011 when you left, you probably thought what's going to happen to my exchange story, and now there's been a new chapter in a different country, in a different continent almost every year,
Yeah.
and I think you have some super interesting sort of like small world of exchange moments. So we have a lot of former exchange students that work with us here at EF, not just Bart and myself, but also we have Henry, who's from the same class year as you. She's Norwegian. She works in the same office as you, and you guys just found out that you might have met each other. Tell us about sort of your disconnected, connected past.
Yeah, so we actually added each other on Facebook, and we were like, why do we have so many friends in common? We just didn't fully get it. And then we realized actually that we were at the same camp. So just before my high school change here, I went to camp for 2 weeks where we have not necessarily met each other in person, but we've definitely crossed paths. So I'm still hoping to find a picture of us two together somehow, but haven't been able to find it. But yeah, we have had about 15 friends in common that we knew from camp, each of us. I've stayed in contact with quite a few of them. She recognized at least the names and tried to stay in contact as well. So that's how we found out that actually, yeah, now 7 years later, that we've been in the same place. We experienced something very similar. So it's been great to share stories with her, although we didn't actually meet in person then. But that's yeah, crazy to think about as well, that we took such a different route entirely. So we went on exchange, and then afterwards had our lives for several years. And now 6 years after our exchange, actually we meet in person again, and we realized that we were exactly at the same spot, experiencing the same things. So to be able to share that with each other is really interesting.
And it's super cool because your exchange stories are so different, right? Like Henry lived in California and her host siblings were the same age as her, and you lived
Yeah.
in Montana with little sisters, and yet there's so much to talk about because God, the world of exchange is addicting, and once you start talking to each other, it's hard to not.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing, honestly. It's so nice to hear the different stories and all the different sort of family settings and their experiences, and what was your biggest takeaway, and what did you like about the US, or perhaps what do you like more about your own culture? I think that's really something so nice at that age to experience something that where you learn about a culture, but also because you are sharing. So a lot of people actually ask you things about your country, about where you're from, about Europe in general, because they've not necessarily visited all the time. To be able to share that, you actually become a different person in a way. So you start to adapt. You learn more about the American culture, but then at the same time, you also come to realize what you like about your own culture, which is kind of interesting to then also take home, to be like, I have learned this abroad, I really like this, and this is going to be me from now on. But at the same time, I miss this about my own culture, and this is still me. It's still embedded in the way that I am. So to sort of form your own identity is super, super interesting at that age. It makes you feel very mature, at least.
And I think you're still living that, right? Because you've been abroad for
Yes.
so many years, and you always tell that story about when you first came back from the U.S. Your parents were noticing you were acting differently. Can you tell us that story about when you were walking around?
Yeah, so we were lost, and we weren't really sure about where to go. And my parents were trying to find a map somehow. And I, instead of reaching out for my phone, looking at GPS, I literally started talking to 4 or 5 different people. And yeah, on the streets. And afterwards, I finally found out what the answer was and where we had to go and where we were. And afterwards, my mom just comes up to me and said, well, this is something you would never do before this. Like, I don't recognize you. Why would you do this? And you've changed entirely. So that was quite interesting to then think about. Well, before this, I thought I was like that, but actually, I picked that up in the US for sure, to talk to your surroundings a bit more, because in the Netherlands we tend to be a bit more towards ourselves. To then change my character a little bit, or the way that I act, without even thinking about it, I literally just started talking to this and this and this person, which is not very common in the Netherlands necessarily. So that was quite a fun takeaway, yeah.
And he still does it. He'd walk around the Boston office, say hello to everyone, does the same thing in the London office. I think it's what you said earlier, it's a part of who you are now. And
it is how I am, and I also think that before that I might have just thought about it, but never thought, okay, that's a normal thing to do. So as soon as I went abroad, I realized that that is actually quite fine to be like that. So I've decided that that is my identity and that's my culture. It's maybe not in my own culture, not in Dutch culture, but that's the way that I see myself and my own culture and identity. So yeah.
And I really like how you said that you also learned to appreciate something from home, because I think one of the hardest things when you come home from your exchange is you don't feel fully your native nationality, right? You don't really feel fully Dutch anymore, and I didn't feel fully American. And that's great for us, but it's really difficult for our friends and our family, right? Because they've sent us off and we've come back completely different, or a better version of ourselves, if you will. So what would you say that you've learned to love even more about the Netherlands that you didn't until you started leaving all the time?
So there's a few things actually. If you look at the broader picture, I would say a few things that I realized that I'm quite fortunate. Also, having traveled to other countries, for instance, I realized that me being Dutch is, although it is a very small country, it does have a lot of opportunities and a lot of jobs, and there's healthcare, and their education is not too expensive. And there's actually quite a few things in the end that I'm quite fortunate about, that I'm actually born in the Netherlands and have been raised there. But then the fact that I also understand a bit more of the world helps me as well. So one of the things, for instance, that I still see myself somewhat Dutch is the way that I am still direct. Having lived in both London as well as in America, people tend to speak a bit more indirectly. And I know how to speak indirectly, but I feel like I sometimes still have a hard time finding the boundary about how direct I'm allowed to be, or I don't want to offend anyone in any way. So I do realize that that's not necessarily because that's me, but that's what I've been grown up with, and that's what my culture is like. So that's something that I do appreciate about myself, but I obviously have to also think about the surroundings. And I think that's something that I truly learned in my exchange year as well, is you learn about something, a different culture, different people around you, but then you also realize you have to adapt to that. So yes, you can be one way and you can be different and you can know the different way of doing things, but you also have to be respectful for the people around you. So you might need to talk a bit more indirectly, which is actually then also interesting, and it makes you feel very mature all of a sudden, because you're able to adapt to a different surrounding, even if you don't really know what the surrounding is. Say, for instance, you travel to another country and you're lost, but at the same time, actually, you're not lost, because yes, you're outside of your comfort zone, but then you'll make it your comfort zone. You can ask people, and you've been trained for this basically on your exchange year, and how to adapt to the situation. So I think that's the truly takeaway from such a year, yeah.
I mean, you just answered the last question that I was going to ask
Oh,
you,
sorry.
actually, which is, no, it's perfect, is that, your chapter that has come after your exchange and every year since is very much inspired by your exchange. And I think you just nailed it on the head of, that your exchange sort of prepared you or gave you the tools to be out of your comfort zone and to be okay with it. And I think that you are the great example of, if you have confidence in who you are, even if you're sort of like a mix or a mess of Dutch American, like maybe a little British now, like that's enough, and it's okay, because you can do anything if you just sort of like stand tall in who you are.
And I still feel like I misinterpreted confidence before, because I was quite a shy person. So when I went on exchange, I felt like I was not necessarily the first person to speak up or the first person to say something, but you develop a certain confidence in a way that you are able to sort of change the way that you are a little bit and become a little bit more outgoing, because Americans tend to be quite outgoing. So you're following them along, and then you do get sort of comfortable with being confident, but also a little bit less shy. And I think that really helps as well to then take back and start life basically after that. I mean, it's a whole different world in a way. If you step out of your comfort zone, you make your comfort zone bigger basically, and yeah, you're able to develop that again. So.
And I think that let's think about your vacation. Actually, when I was thinking about this morning, your vacation is such a great example of what comes from an exchange. So you just recently got back from a trip, and you went to Spain, and you ended in France. What was the environment, and who were you around in France?
In France, in what way? Who I was visiting, or
yeah, exactly. So you're in Paris, and you're not with a bunch of Dutchies, and you're not with a bunch of Americans. Like, who were you with?
So I met up with one of our colleagues who lives there, who's Portuguese. He speaks English, so I'm able to communicate with him. And actually, someone from Sweden who also works for EF here in London was also there. While you're also hearing a lot of French around, and I don't speak any French, but it doesn't make me, in a way, I know the basics, so it doesn't make me feel like I'm completely uncomfortable. And before that, like you said, I went to Spain, and again, my Spanish is also not super good, to be honest. So having heard first Spanish all around and lots of different languages, and I saw a lot of cultural differences that I noticed from England, but also from the Netherlands. And then flying to another country, which was a bit of a spontaneous move, which is not necessarily the way that I would normally act. But the weather was horrible, to be honest, in Spain. So I was looking for an alternative. And I ended up going to France, although that was not planned at all, which was actually quite funny to then also come to realize that a lot of people speak different languages, but that doesn't mean that we're not able to communicate. Even if I would meet someone who was Spanish, an older lady, for instance, she didn't speak any English, and I barely speak any Spanish, but she would say the words that she would know in English, and I'd say the words that I knew in Spanish, and we were able to communicate. And that's just by using our hands and by aiming or looking at certain maps or pointing at certain things is how we had our conversation. And she was so proud of herself that she was like, I actually speak English, I didn't even know. And I was saying, I actually speak Spanish, and I didn't even know that. So I think that was a nice way of actually going on holiday and hearing different languages while still just surviving in a way, right? You're able to communicate still with people around you. So I didn't feel lonely in any way, even though I didn't know anyone on my trip at all, other than the friend that I met up in France. But I still had an amazing time. So.
It's wild. And I mean, like, not to compress your exchange story into a couple sentences, but you are a Dutch kid that moved to Montana, who came back to the Netherlands, who found himself in Boston and then in London, and went on a solo trip to Spain and was able to communicate, brokenly but still effectively with people. And then you ended up in Paris, of all places, with a Portuguese friend and a Swedish friend. What do you think your 16-year-old self thinks of, like, what in the world that's happened in your life in the last 7 years?
I definitely wouldn't have believed myself, to be honest. I would have said that person was lying, that is not me. I like traveling, and I like going on holiday, but after a week or so, then I would need to be home. At least that was the thing before this. I like my comfort zone a lot, but as soon as I basically got out of this comfort zone, I wanted more, and it's sort of like a travel bug, as people call it. I wanted to see what the world is out there, what it's like, and I basically would love to see literally everything. I want to see every country. I want to see every cultural value, any cultural difference that I can find to learn from it, because it's such a valuable lesson, and able to, you mature again and become independent, and you start to understand more than just things you read, for instance. So that's truly, I think, the value that you get from it.
That's incredible. And I mean, if you look back, this is really hard, and sometimes Bart and I feel like we're getting a little old, even though our exchange wasn't perhaps as long ago as Alex, as some of you heard his interview 30 years ago. But if you look back on sort of your time and being in the EF family, what do you wish you could have said to your younger self before you started this journey?
Lower your expectations. Whatever you expect, just go with it. Don't think about what you're doing. Just do and just adapt as much as you can to what is happening and learn and learn and learn. And I think that was something that I was still a little bit too immature about to think. Now that I think back, I think it was quite immature in a way that I just always listened to my surroundings and still just stayed in that bubble and stayed the way that I was. And I think during my year, I really just, as much closed-minded as I was then, I was like, okay, there's no more boundaries. Let's just be as open-minded as possible at some point. But I think that's how you should definitely go into it, is just lower your expectations, just go with it and see what it is. And no matter what, you will learn something and you will take stuff out of it, which are going to be positive for in the future. And you grow as a person, no matter what the experience is abroad, I think. So being in a discomfort only makes you more comfortable if you're in that same situation again. So I think that's a lesson.
That's amazing. And it's awesome. Like, I'm really happy that our exchange story paths crossed, and that, I mean, I think, I'm not kidding, I think Bart and I have spent copious hours reflecting back on our teenage selves and like the first day of school and how it felt getting off the plane, and those are things that never fade. But it's also super cool to think about how they intersect in the future. You know, you were there for my birthday party in London this year, when there were like my best friend from my high school exchange who's Norwegian, our Portuguese friend, our Swedish friends, another American, and you know, of course, all of our Dutch friends. And the world of exchange is really big, but also feels super small. So really, really thankful to have you in the EF family and to be able to share your story with everyone. And hopefully someone else will just sort of decide to blow out their expectations and see what happens. They could end up having a French vacation that's perfectly international.
Exactly. I always love hearing the different stories, and like you said, I could literally talk about this for hours, so we probably don't have enough time to talk about for instance, the first day of school. That already would take me about a half a day to talk about anyway, so definitely always love chatting about and learning from other people what they have learned and their takeaways as well. So much fun to talk about and learn from each other, and it feels like family. I mean, that's the thing. You can meet someone completely random who has had a similar experience, and you already feel like there's a certain bond where you just want to hear their story and want to know what they thought about it, and what did they like and what did they not like, and how did they learn from all of that. I think that's so much fun to do.
That's wonderful. And if any of you want to ask Bart more questions, you can reach out to him. We'll have his information below in the comment section. Again, we love talking about our exchange stories, and I'm sure, especially if you're going to Montana, he would love to be able to help you really enjoy. Maybe you'll go to the same exact town. That'd be super cool. But thanks again for joining us, everyone, and thank you so much, Bart. This was fantastic. And make sure that you tune in next week for the next episode of Real Talk.